Okay.
Another thing. Okay.
Excellent.
All right. So everyone present, with a show of hands, who here can right now see their own nose? Okay. Without moving the. Okay. So
without moving the what?
without moving the eyes. Yeah, you're fine. No, he
went cross-eyed.
went cross-eyed. Thank you.
So I don't.
Okay. So no, right? Although it is in your visual field. So why do you not see it?
Because of the brain.
Right. Why? Because of is that just the thing? Because of the brain.
The brain filters it out because it's always there, and I don't know.
Yep, that's exactly right. So the brain filters it out because it's always there. It's not something that's necessary to perceive. It's not. It's well predicted, let's say. So here are a couple other things. I'm going to show you an illusion of a mask. You see there's a mask, it's rotating, now it's in the backside, but see that?
Yeah.
Wait, do it again?
It's rotating.
Why is it an illusion?
You don't see.
Do you not see the
now?
face rotating back? Do you just see the back of the mask?
Like that there's another face behind?
That the behind face just looks like it's rotating back.
Like, so the mask comes such that it looks like it's out of the screen here, right?
Right.
And coming towards you.
Yeah.
And now it's
but now
going
it looks
it
like
should be going away from you, but it doesn't. It looks like it's coming back around this way.
Say it again.
So the back of the mask looks, instead of like it's going into the screen, it looks like it's coming out. Also.
Yes, I see that.
okay. It's not doing that. It's just rotating.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. You see what I mean?
No.
So it's a mask, right? So it's concave and convex. So this is the front side, and it's rotating, and then it looks like there's another part rotating back.
Looks like it has two front sides.
Yeah. Do you not see it?
Nope.
You just see the back of the mask? That's actually...
Now I see the back. And now I see the front. Right.
You can see through the illusion.
Okay, which is rare, actually, for this illusion.
Maybe
look,
does it must mean you're very smart or very dumb. Like,
So the face goes like this. Sorry, okay. So here the face is in front, goes like this, and now see another face going like this.
And it seems to invert the rotation. And so far as
Yeah.
it's going
It always goes to.
counterclockwise.
I'm going
It
to be
seems like
angry
it-
about the simulation, but I see it rotates only to the right.
Yeah, no, that's what it does. Okay, so you actually, the illusion didn't work on you, but on most people it does.
yeah, me too. I also see it on
You
on the
only
right.
see it rotating
Yeah,
this
yeah.
way? Yeah, for me it pops out and seems like it
It
turns
looks
very
like it
fast
does
second.
this and then this. Because, okay, so the illusion
Like
actually
this?
didn't work.
Okay.
Like this, and now the reason, and it didn't work on
Interesting.
most of you, but
And it's only for the first half second too, because as soon as the
yeah, and now it's no longer.
the edge of the mask comes around again, then it breaks the
But
illusion.
now it looks like in the front.
And then it's broken instantly.
Interesting.
Try to see it. So,
Okay.
which is interesting because for most people, like it's actually really hard to see the truth of it.
Yeah, I can't get my eyes
Maybe
to
it's
do it.
because we're enlightened, right?
That's probably the reason.
Yeah, probably.
So what's happening here is that your brain really knows well how to see faces with noses facing you. It has never had to do this. See the back of a face looking
From the inside.
Yeah, from the inside. And so it corrects the visual perception, the input, so that it looks like what you would expect it to look. Okay, so let's look at another one. Probably have seen this one before. It's a really classic. It's called Muller-Lyer, the Muller-Lyer illusion. And does everyone here know it?
No.
Okay. So which line is longer?
Which horizontal line?
Yeah. This one or this
All
one?
right. I can assume they are the same size.
Right,
and
but what does
the-
it look like?
And the right one looks bigger.
The bottom one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, they are the same size. Now, why does this happen? Why does this illusion happen? Because it actually doesn't work on all people. It works on all people in the West. It all works on all people in modern society, but it actually doesn't work on many people in Africa. So why is that? Well, the reason is that our society sees this kind of thing a lot, and so you interpret it, this line, as being shorter but closer, and this one as being longer but farther away, so even though they look the same superficially, your brain interprets them in a different way. So this is what we see in our everyday life, right? We have these two lines are the same length, but this one is clearly shorter because this one is the whole wall, right? Like because of how we see things in 3 dimensions, in societies that don't have square buildings, the illusion doesn't work. So, all of this is to say, I'm going to talk about predictive processing, which is a theory that's now gaining traction in cognitive science about how our mind works. And it's essentially, the point is that our brain is a prediction machine, which doesn't mean it's not in a cold way. I've heard people say, no, it's not a prediction machine, it's a meaning machine. It's both. But the let's say mathematical function, the mathematical function would be, actually I'm not going to need this anymore, so, okay. The mathematical function is going to be a predicting machine. So what you essentially have in the usual thing we have is we have input, okay? And the input, let's say, has this shape, okay? And we expect our expectation of what the current input is. It's not expectation for the future, it's expectation as it's prediction of what's happening, what's supposed to happen right now. Let's say we expect it to be like this. So our actual perception, our actual experience would be something like this. Which is to say there is a certain function that combines the input, the actual sensory input, with our expectation of what the input would be, which is called prior, to create, in combination, our actual experience. And that explains the illusions that we just saw, that worked on all of you. Yeah. Right? Yes.
That's
Good. Okay. So, essentially, within this field, and there's a few sub-theories, and I'm not going to go... It's also not... While it's very popular, it's not... Thank you. It's not, like, necessarily true, but it's one of the leading theories. Okay, so... essentially, there's like a spectrum. This is the input, and this is the prediction. And my perception is going to be somewhere along this axis. And according to some theories, this is actually like it's supposed to be a unifying theory of mind in the sense that it can explain a lot of different phenomena. So for example, if this is input, just I, and this is expectation, E, if I am overly input oriented, as in I don't rely enough on my expectation, there is a theory that suggests that this is just autism. This is literally what autism is. Not being able to rely enough on your prediction to see something as more than what it literally is. On the other hand, if you overly rely on your expectation, you don't take the feedback from reality, the actual input, as relevant, this is schizophrenia. And so there is a autism schizophrenic spectrum that's actually just this thing. How far are you in each direction? There's interesting studies that were done with AI that show that sort of you get similar behavior based on just where you put, using this methodology based on where you put the balance. And like the balance should be, it depends on the subject. It should be somewhere in the middle. Okay, so how does this relate to psychedelics? First of all, to me, this part is really, really interesting. Like, what's the structure of this? And one theory that I subscribe to is that the expectation exists, it's like a multi-level thing. So like we have in perception, we have the part of, let's just for simplicity's sake, we're going to talk about visual perception. So there's the part that like does colors and lines and all those surface level stuff. And then there's a correlation that goes higher into like, okay, it's a shape. and then from that it's like it's an object with several different shapes, and from there you get like higher and higher, and you get more abstract. So for example, you can and the more abstract it goes, the more you need to rely on expectations. For example, you can see a market, but what do you really see when you see a market? You have a concept of what a market is, and the input sort of fits into that, so you can actually recognize it as a market. So the higher you go, the more abstract things get, and so the expectation works on all those levels. It works on the, okay, what's the shape I expect to see here? What's the line? What's the curvature I expect to see here? What's the shape? So you go up in the hierarchy into more and more abstract concepts. And what psychedelics maybe do, this is a theory, but it's that they have, actually give myself an exact phrasing from to use here so that I'm accurate. So you have multi-level, like the brain is a multi-level prediction machine. We have surface prediction and higher predictions. And the higher the dosage of the psychedelic that you take, the more the psychedelic molecules bind to receptors higher up in the processing stream in terms of like more abstract. And this is a research done by Carhart Harris, if you want to look it up. And essentially, the more abstract you get, the more you get into fundamental notions of like reality and how you see yourself, how you see the world, and stuff like that. And what psychedelics do is sort of generally you have like the deeper it is, the more rigid it is, because the harder it's going to be to get actually data to change it. Like if something is abstract, I can always sort of fit the data to it. And the more abstract it is, the easier it's going to be if it's like a worldview type thing. What psychedelics do is they bind to the areas sort of in charge of that, and they make them malleable, they make them flexible, and so it allows you to reinterpret the data maybe in a better way. So usually you have like the data comes in, you put it in a bucket, and what it does is it allows you, let's try changing up the buckets, let's try creating new buckets, let's try doing stuff like that. And to the extent, and this is my input, we have a lot of stuff that gets ingrained when we're very, very small. We have very little understanding of the world, and we have very little data to go on. And once you make these structures malleable, and you go into it with the aim of maybe changing perspectives that you find to be not serving you well, then you actually now have a lot more data that you can go on, that you can maybe, okay, let's see how this fits better into reality than what I did when, what I decided was true when I didn't even have theory of mind to be able to tell that actually I'm not the center of the universe. And so in doing that, you can actually overcome, it could be trauma, it could be just maladaptive patterns that through which you see reality, in a very meaningful and powerful way, and that actually one trip with a high enough dosage is actually enough to like change your mental abstract architecture of how you see yourself, how you see the world, how you see reality, and higher dosage you get like what's ego, like is there ego and stuff like that, ego dissolution, and all that like metaphysical stuff. So that's essentially it. That's what I had in mind. Any questions?
Question.
Yeah.
Wow, first of all,
Amazing.
super.
I wanted to ask, like we started with visual inputs,
Yeah.
and like we are doing the same process of the how do you call that?
Expectation.
We're doing the expectation alteration to concepts, to abstract concepts that are not visual as well, like the concept of I don't know, like let's say socialism. I perceive socialism in a certain way.
Yeah.
So that's what you mean by expectation.
So
Because there is no socialism cannot be an input because it's not out there in reality.
socialism is not an input, and that actually relates to what we're talking about with Yuval Noah Harari, where I think he is eventually wrong, which is what I think Richard was also getting to. Socialism isn't an input, but socialism is good, is an input. So you can, socialism is an input in a very abstract way. You see a socialist country, it's not just one scene that you see, but you see many scenes and you interpret them, you put them together into socialism. So the government, what's a government, right? Well, government is a concept. Government does this. Government is made up of a bunch of different things, and this is not just. And when you get input, so input, for example, could be Venezuela failed, right? There were a lot of starving people in Venezuela, and they died, and so.
You mean the sentence itself?
Or like you get input that you interpret in that way, right?
So written sentences and like things that you can write or speak, they are inputs.
Yeah, for
That
example,
you can-
they are inputs and they then affect your expectations. Now, again, I should make a distinction between this is there are multiple variants of the theory. At the very least, this is about like the literal visual perception, but there is good reason to think that it goes beyond that into more abstract concepts that are not just like which goes to your question. Like, wait, that's not actually like a visual input, but
Yeah, but it goes for me to the question that the input of the sentence itself
Yeah.
is sound. It's
for sound or letters,
yeah,
depending on the medium.
So the structure of the conception is in our minds anyway. So the input is doing its input thing in sounds or in visual, in the visual field or whatever, and we are interpreted as something else. So
Yes. So I think that. Tell me if I'm not understanding correctly. I'm going to try to rephrase what you said. So far I talked mainly about the input, the visual input, and the expectation, creating like something in the middle that is our experience.
Yeah.
Right. What we're talking about now is abstract concepts that are beyond visual input.
yeah.
So at that point you're just all mind, right? Is that essentially what you're saying?
I also
In a sense. So I want to know how you relate this notion of visual input that becomes our expectations. How do you correlate it to more abstract concepts?
So the answer would be, and again, this is not widely agreed upon. Like it's not a consensus even within predictive processing.
Yeah,
Predictive processing is a bunch of different subfields.
In your
Okay.
in
So
your mind.
I just want to clarify that I'm not talking about like this is the truth. There is a spectrum because the visual input itself goes through. There's something called reverse hierarchy theory, which shows that we actually see things in reverse order to the order of the input. So I'll see a face before I'll see a nose. I'll recognize that you have a face. If you show me a face, I'll recognize face before I'll recognize nose. Even though nose is smaller, it's like a smaller detail within the frame, and it gets processed upstream for earlier before because I have rods and cones, and they
for the full object we need is the things that make that object an object, and we processing all of the things to make a face.
Yeah.
So in a sense, we should recognize the small things
before
first.
yeah.
But we don't.
But we don't. There is a way in which visual processing is heavily already relied upon conceptual processing. There are connections from the frontal lobe back to visual processing, even early visual processing. So, which is one of the things these theories use to justify them. Look, there is actually connections there, and so in a sense it's hard to completely separate the two. Like I have processing, and that processing goes through. I have input. That input goes through processing, all the way. Like my input is just color, shapes, stuff like that. It goes through processing. Eventually, it in a sense leaves just the sensor input itself in the processing.
Yeah.
But it's the kind of thing that happens would be the same. So I have
if we
information.
if we imagine it like in a linear line of how the signal path goes, although it's super complex,
Yeah, we're simplifying a lot here, obviously.
Yeah, in some area of the way it transfers itself from the input itself to a conceptual thing, and throughout that path there is a lot of steps. Like there is a lot of steps that we will encounter in that process.
Yes, so I'll try to, so let's say this is like the input level. Okay, the input level is is like I see something visual. Okay, and then I have the expectation. There's like a relationship here in the original, and then it goes up. Like the expectation of what the very low level superficial input would be. Mm-hmm. And then it goes up. So here it's already not strictly the visual aspect, but let's say it's shapes, right? Or mm-hmm. something like that it's a processing of the visual, and then I have expectation of what the shape would be. Mm-hmm. And then the
so it's multi-layered.
Yes, and then eventually you get to like really abstract concepts. And what is my expectation that the abstract concept is going to be? So for example, if I see millions died in Venezuela because socialism is bad, or something like that, really, again, simplifying a lot of the things. And I have expectations, socialism works, socialism is better than capitalism. Mm-hmm. Then I need a way in my mental, and this is no longer the visual input itself, but it's the internal processing of what the outside is giving me in a very abstract level, and what I expect the outside to be giving me. And there is a balancing act here where, because you don't want to give up your whole worldview entirely, just, okay, I saw this, like, because data could be wrong, like one piece of data could be wrong.
That sounds like if we make the ego as a concept in our talk, mm-hmm. maybe that's where the ego comes in.
Ego is has a lot of different
part of the ego.
Ego has a lot of different. This is where worldview, I would say, comes in.
Yeah.
Because ego is just
which makes the ego, but
okay, because it depends who you ask. Ego is going to get a different interpretation. But that's exactly what I would say. That's where worldview comes in, mm-hmm. And I have what I expect reality to be like. I'm a good person. I'm a bad person. I deserve love. I don't deserve love. Again, the really abstract. The world is cruel, the world is awesome. And then I get data and I sort of put it into the buckets that most fit what I have. And for me to justify changing something that deep, I'll need a lot of very, just in everyday life, I'll need either a lot of very counter, like a lot of data that counters it and that just can't make sense. I can't put into the buckets in a way that makes sense. Like my thinking, and I might try to put this to the test in my next degree. That generally what we do is we take like the absolute minimal step that we need to make in our mental architecture mm-hmm. to accommodate the data. And sometimes we don't need to take any steps. Sometimes we need to take small steps. When we need to change something foundational, let's say this is like a base belief about. Again, socialism is good, or I don't want to go deeper than into like who am I? What's the world? Mm-hmm. Or capitalism. Capitalism is good, and then you see, there's this CEO did this thing. I would say, okay, this CEO is bad. Like, there's a lot of steps in the middle I can take before changing this whole thing that's underlying the whole structure.
But when it's written, socialism is bad.
Yeah.
And let's say I'm a socialist and I'm really, really deep into socialism. It's part of my identity. Mm-hmm. And let's say you're a capitalist and you're really capitalist and it's part of your identity. At the end of the day, we'll both see the same input.
Yeah. So the input. So that goes a few
we will
levels.
Be able to read the exact same.
Yes.
Levels.
Yes.
So
Yeah. But there's levels of analysis. So the higher you go, the more you leave the actual literal input itself. So again, mm-hmm. it's like you start with input, but the input gets. So there's a sentence. Someone wrote this sentence, mm-hmm. right? So I get the sentence, and I sort of my process eventually is. The person who wrote this sentence, like there is a person who wrote this sentence. There's a sentence here that was written by someone, right? Like eventually my processing of the information in front of me, this is not just a silver thing with prongs. this, which is already pretty complex of a like visual analysis. This is a fork.
Mm-hmm.
I know what a fork is, right? I have a concept of a fork, and I recognize this as a fork. So if someone writes a sentence, if I say a sentence written, so there's the letters. So this is T, this is H, this is actually we recognize the whole word first.
The thing that you're talking about is how certain people, not certain people, different people perceive the same inputs.
Yes.
So that's what you wanted to point out. That I'm correct?
That's part of it, because psychedelics affect the really abstract. Because the point of this is the psychedelics. Psychedelics affect the really abstract stuff. Like, eventually, if we go upstream, you do get to like what my worldview is and how this fits into my worldview. And psychedelics, what they do is they really make that worldview flexible. And, I might be able to not put this in the regular buckets that I do. I might be able to actually change the architecture. If I have like tracks, right?
So, but
I might be able to change the path
in the direction of you see the actual input as it is. Like this is in which direction of the spectrum it goes when you take psychedelic?
No, you don't see things as they are, ever, because you always are mediated through some.
But in which direction it goes?
It goes in the direction of maybe I have something better I can do with the data that I hold or with the beliefs that I hold. I can change the mental architecture of expectations.
Right, so it changes expectations,
all right.
essentially.
Now I get it. All
Right, they change, psychedelics change under scale expectations much more than the input itself.
Yes, if you take a low dosage, it changes the input itself, which is
That's where hallucinations, like things move
exactly
parts of the input.
Which is why it's I think it's important to look at this as a spectrum from the actual literal input to conception to abstract concepts. Because psychedelics work at a low dosage, they work here. But the higher the dosage, the higher they go into your architecture, your worldview. And the deeper they can change it.
That relates to what you said, Avishai. When we talked there about the neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
I don't remember what you said.
Like it causes deconditioning of previously held beliefs.
Yeah.
Yes, that's sort
in
of
the higher level of expectations, of abstract levels of who you are, what the world is, your identity, very abstract.
Yeah.
Cool, very cool.
Right. Very cool. Okay, can I comment? Or?
You wanted to say something earlier.
Pronouns.
Okay.
So first of all, it's very clearly you're a teacher, because I feel I've been taught. So thank you for explaining to me something that, very simple terms, I couldn't understand myself. So very good job. First, just this threw me to this internal dialogue between Plato and Aristotle, where Plato is like this very expectancy, very abstract ideas, forms of how the universe is, and everything is just small inputs that just manifest the more abstract, more psychedelic, more schizophrenic side, versus Aristotle, which is like more scientific, more related to biology and how the world is. So it threw me there, and I thought it was interesting. And the question is, given that you made this scale on autism versus schizophrenia, how would you relate this model also with psychedelics, but also without, into psychotherapy? Like, would you recommend, from your own knowledge or intuition, like someone with autism would respond to interventions which focus more on input, or actually you want to make their thinking much more abstract, and someone schizophrenic, you want to make their input less abstract, and make it more input? So, or is it the other way around, like you wanted to match where they're at?
I don't know enough about how meta-flexible it is, like how because it could just be biological that autistic people, if not, then that's great, maybe we can cure autism, which would be awesome. But I think there's a biological aspect to how much I rely on my priors that can vary somewhat, but I don't. If it was possible, I'd say try to teach them to rely on their, which I think in a sense is what we do, because reasonably autistic people, like not hardcore, they can be taught social cues and stuff like that. It's just in a different way than most of us learn it. So in a sense, I think we do that, and I think it is good to try to teach people to get to the healthy bounds. And again, what's the optimal?
To have a center, to find somewhere in the center between the two? Or?
Yeah, and again, where the optimal center was sort of a simplification of like there's a right balance here.
Right.
Is it actually center? Like what's the actual extremes? It's hard to say, but if possible, getting them to a healthy place to just allow them to function better in society. And there's like opponent processing here that's like, okay, you actually you don't want to overgeneralize, you don't want to undergeneralize. You want to have a healthy relationship with the input that you're getting.
Interesting that.
So I'm sorry.
So if it was possible, I'd say that. In terms of therapy, I'm not. I can't say because I don't know enough about either
That's
condition.
interesting because I wonder if you need to give. I don't know if it's the conclusion here, but if you give acid to autistic people, how that's and I don't think it's been studied also, but I think it's a very interesting idea. Like it might be
a good idea to study this.
Yeah,
it sounds.
and I'm sure you'll get approval for the study. Right? Let me drug off this.
Yeah. Also the problem of consent obviously is a huge issue. So,
No, but there's a reasonable place where they could consent.
Okay, interesting.
So
Richard, you wanna?
I can't remember what I was going to say. It was something earlier on. I know one thing I wanted to say was about what an input is, just because of the way you started out the question, talking about the input as literally the stuff coming into your eyes or ears, right? But within the brain as well, I think it's important to recognize that you have input between modules. So you have input from the eyes, let's say, to the visual cortex or to the other processing pathway, right? But you also have connections between the frontal lobe and your visual cortex, right?
Yes.
So you have input from visual cortex into the frontal lobe, and you have input from the frontal lobe into the visual cortex, right?
from a different sense or
Not from a different sense.
frontal
I'm
lobe
saying
is
that the layer,
All right.
that the
So-
layering
so,
of the system
you can-
means that
but
each
it's,
layer inputs to another.
it will be how do you say it?
You want to say in Hebrew, and then
I forgot it in Hebrew as well, so that's the problem. It will be a good statement to say that this is an input because it doesn't come from the outside; it's come from the inside. So
But
input
that
is a good
doesn't,
word
that
for
doesn't
that.
only mean it's an expectation, though. Insofar as our spectrum is between expectation and input, I think it's important that just because something's generated inside doesn't mean that it's only an expectation, right? That the, let's say, visual cortex has
So
expectations
ask.
for the frontal
I
lobe
don't know.
itself.
So ask, is it
Okay,
Like,
yeah. So thirst, for example, is considered input.
in?
Like
I wonder in what way.
In the sense that when you feel thirsty, that is a sensory input, or it doesn't have to be sensory, but that is input that you are getting just from within your body. But it's still input. It's not.
All
it
right,
doesn't
all
have
right.
to be external and external to your mind, not external
like
to.
in the scientific community, when you say input, you can say that input or that input, but the word input will be good for either terms.
Yes.
All right. Cool.
Interesting. Can you summarize for the video?
Okay. Yeah. So essentially, there is a theory in cognitive science that what we try to do is to minimize expectation. That our perception is the minimization of the difference between the expectation of what the input is supposed to be and what the input is. And that input goes like there, it's layered. So we have the very bottom levels of the input, and it goes higher and higher and higher. The higher it goes, the more abstract it gets. And we still have expectations in the abstract sense, and that's at that point it's just our worldview, like what we perceive the world to be, not perceive in the literal sense of visual perception, but what our structure of the world is. And whenever we get input, it interacts with our worldview at all levels. So it interacts in the bottom level and higher up and higher up and higher up. And to the extent that there are changes that we need to make, we would make them as close to the bottom as possible in regular conditions. When we take psychedelics, what they do is they make our deeper, and the higher the dosage, the deeper you go. They make our the deeper parts of our worldview malleable and flexible, and that allows the input that we have, and the input could also be like memories. There's a bit, imagination, for example, and visual input, they get processed in a similar place in the brain. So, for example, if I process a memory on psychedelics, I could have it like affect my worldview differently. And so on psychedelics, you constantly remember things, and like there's a lot of that you're not even aware of that your mind goes through in processing. And on psychedelics, your accumulated knowledge can serve to change your worldview in a deeper sense. The higher the dosage, and it probably obviously also changes from individual to individual what the high dose would be. In a way that is like a permanent restructuring with one psychedelic trip that would be more informed than when that worldview was put together, because often these deeper parts of the worldview are put together at a time where you're not developed enough to have like a good way of understanding. So when you're a child and you interact with your parents are your whole world, and they do something wrong, then there's something you internalize as being deeply wrong with yourself or with the world. And up to a certain age, there's even no difference there. And so being an adult, now you have more experiences and more stuff you can draw on that you remember consciously and unconsciously. And when you take psychedelics in a way that makes this malleable, and you go through the process of actually changing it, and to what extent that has to be conscious, like a conscious choice, I'm not sure. But you can actually change these deeper worldviews. You can go much higher here in the changing of the expectation than you would without the psychedelics.
I just wanted to add.
I'm finishing the recording.
All right.
Thank you, Guy.